Hello and welcome to the latest team review for the Qatar World Cup here on Celtic Down Under. My name is Laura and I'm joined by Liam. How you doing, Liam?
Good, I've got my hot dogs and my Budweiser and I'm ready to talk America, y'all.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. We are here to talk the good old US of A today. Not the also rans in the World Cup that you might expect when you look a little bit more into the numbers. But before we get to that, talk us through that glorious Stars and Stripes shirt that you've got on there.
Yep, this is the USA 94 away jersey. Um,
Mhm.
in what was, I think, an act of absolute genius, they made the home shirt the red and white stripes and the away shirt the stars. So you
Mhm.
literally had the stars and the stripes. I collect a lot of retro shirts, as you can see with my South Africa shirt behind me there, and the current Japan and Germany shirts. Um, but this USA one is one of my favourites because it's the thing about the USA. If you look at their shirts down the years, they you just look at them and you go, "That's America." You
Yeah.
would never mistake it for any other country. You're like, that's the US,
Yeah.
And I like that kind of in your face quality with some of their jerseys.
I actually think that that iconic stars and stripes design is something they've not taken full advantage of with their kits. I think, like you say, the reason that it was so good at 94 was because they did take full advantage of it and it was full Star Spangled Banner and all of that stuff
Oh yeah,
that the Americans love. Whereas I don't think it's very American to go as understated as they sometimes do with their kits. I would like them to go, we're America and we're here and do it that way, you know?
they had a really nice one. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, which I've got somewhere else. I'll wear on a future show. Which was like white, and then it had like red and blue stripes kind of coming across it. So it
Hmm.
was kind of like a modern sort of take on the whole stars and stripes thing. Again, just unmistakably American. Um,
Yeah.
you know, uh, yeah, their strip this year is a bit boring to be honest. I'm gonna pass on that, and I'll wear this when they play England.
Exactly. We'll all be USA supporters for a day at least.
Aye.
Hopefully we'll see that shirt. We are planning to hopefully do, while it might not be watch alongs or full on match coverage for every match of the World Cup, I think we're certainly planning to do review shows where we talk about at least the last few days games or something like that throughout the
Mm.
World Cup. So hopefully when we're doing reviews of those games, we'll be able to see your plethora of international shirts at that time. But until then, we have to content ourselves with what we've got, which is a look at the current USA team. Now, talking of the current USA team, I was looking back at the record, and I'm just going to pull it up here. Um, uh, Again, I've said to you a few times that sometimes you can think you know a lot about football until you're actually forced to do a bit of research, and then you find out that actually you don't know an awful lot at all. I had in my head that USA qualified in '94 because they hosted. They'll qualify in 2026 because they're hosting with Canada and Mexico. But apart from that, they haven't done very well. But when you look
Mm.
at that, there obviously, some of them are less in context than others. But
Mm.
semi-finals at the first time of asking in 1930, round of 16 in 1934. 1950 they got to the group stage, then they had this big long space of time up until the 90s where they didn't qualify at all, group stage again. But actually from 94 onwards, when you really would say that football was starting to take off in earnest in the USA, you've got round of 16, quarterfinals, round of 16, a lot of decent results there in the 90s and throughout the 2000s. Obviously, they've not qualified for the last two World Cups either in 2018. Sorry, the last World Cup in 2018. They have qualified in 2022, and it remains to be seen what happens there. But I don't know. What's your impression, Liam, of USA? Are they sometimes underestimated? Do you think in terms of the threat that they can pose in these tournaments?
Yeah, I think it's a common conceit, particularly with Europeans such as us, who football is our number one sport in our country. So there is this tendency to think that in other countries, just because football's not the number one sport, they might not necessarily be that good at it.
Mm.
Um, Now, America is better known, obviously, for the women's game. I mean, the women's team are the women's football equivalent of the Harlem Globetrotters. Nobody can get near them at the moment, and that's unlikely to change anytime soon. And the funny thing is, in most countries, like Japan being an example,
Yeah.
The men's team qualified for the World Cup in '98 for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
which inspired the women's team to get more serious about it, and they ended up winning the World Cup in 2011, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you look at the emergence of the US women's team from the 90s onwards, has actually spurred the men's team on to try and do better. So it's an interesting paradigm to look at that. Most countries, it's men's football, then women's football follows on, but in America, it's the opposite.
Hmm.
And even to this day, I believe that statistically, far more women play, far higher percentage of women play football than men do in the US.
Mm-hmm.
It has actually struggled in terms of marketing to shake off the notion that it is a women's sport, which is kind of interesting when you think about how much, historically, how much kind of chauvinism is attached to football in Europe.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting country in many ways, America, and I think that the men's game there is catching on now, and it's growing. I've watched quite a bit of the MLS over the last couple of years, and they are
the standard of football in the MLS is growing rapidly. It really is quite a fun league to watch.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the J League in the late 90s. There were teething problems once they initially got it set up, and for the first couple of years, it was basically just a freak show of foreigners who were past it.
Yeah,
and the MLS was like that up until a few years ago, but now most of the stars in that league are either American or Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
So that is excellent for those two countries, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, and for me anyway, like I said before, so many of the countries are unknown quantities to us going into this World Cup that we've had to do a bit of research on. I struggle to remember a time where there was as many American players at top European clubs as there is right now. When you think about it, we're of similar ages, and I think we could all name on one hand the American players that we remember: Landon Donovan, Brian McBride, goalkeepers like Tim Howard and Casey Keller, Clint Dempsey more recently. But apart from that, they all spanned a number of different eras. Whereas now you've got Carter Vickers at Celtic, who we know very well. You've got Christian Pulisic and Giovanni Reina. You've got McKennie at Juventus. These players are coming over and playing not just at a good level in European football, but at the very top level. Do you think that means that they'll pose more of a threat at this World Cup than they maybe have done previously?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say straight from the off that I fancy them to get out of this group. I don't know if I don't think they'll win the group, but I do think they will qualify. I think they've got what it takes to beat one of either England or Wales to that second spot. Yeah.
So let's take it down a slightly Celtic route. We are on Celtic Down Under after all. So let's indulge ourselves before we talk about some of the more glamorous names on the potential team sheet. There's no guarantee at this stage, as we record this, the final 23-man squad for the countries going to the World Cup has not been announced. There's no guarantee that Cameron Carter-Vickers will be in that 23-man squad for the USA. First question I suppose to ask you on that is, based on what we've seen of him, do you think he deserves a place in that World Cup squad for the USA?
Absolutely. Yep. Yes, no question. I actually think the spell that he's been out injured recently has worked in his favour, because it has shown just how important he is to Celtic, because we struggled defensively when he wasn't there. And there's debate now as to what is Celtic's best centre-back pairing, but we know it's Carter Vickers +1. That's beyond debate at this point. And for someone still as relatively young as he is to come in to have such a commanding first season, to become such a leader to the point where he is now the club captain while our main captain is injured. It's an incredible meteoric rise. It really is. From Spurs reserves to Champions League competitor in less than a year. That's an incredible move.
Yeah, it really is fantastic, and I for one, I'm one of these people who I was a bit disappointed, not just on a personal level for Kyogo and Rio that they didn't make the Japan squad, but just from a personal pride point of view, I love to see Celtic players represent their countries at the World Cup because it gives me a bit of extra investment. So if we can at least get that for Carter Vickers, then I would love to see that for him. And we'll obviously go on and talk about the Japan situation when we get to them in our reviews. Looking at the rest of the USA team, I think a lot of people who haven't been paying close attention to the USA team might suggest that Christian Pulisic is without a doubt the golden boy of the USA team, the man on which all of America's hopes will rest for any kind of impact at the World Cup. But is it fair to say that there's maybe perhaps another player in the team that might be more of a key aspect to how they play?
I think there's actually a few players in that team that could step up and really do something. Again, it's the kind of Anglo-centric view that our media takes of things, that because Pulisic is playing for Chelsea, we assume that he's the best player.
And the thing is, he's not even to say he's playing for Chelsea. He's struggling to hold down a berth in that team at the moment, and has been for some time.
Yeah. Now, let's be under no illusions. I think Pulisic is a class act, and I think it's a mistake for Chelsea not to try and accommodate him because he is a very, very good player.
Yes.
But I think that the USA back in the day, back in like '94, everybody knew Alexi Lalas. That was your main man, right? Later on, as you said, you had Claudio Reyna, then you had Tim Howard, Langdon Donovan. It was always one or two stars surrounded by a team of journeymen, right? That is no longer the case. There's about 5 or 6 Champions League level stars in that team, and the rest of the squad are all playing at a pretty decent level as well. The US go into this World Cup, I think, with the best squad they've had since 2002 when they got to the last 8.
Well, that's the thing as well to remember is, there's a lot of people would have a lot of sneering to do at the USA. They have made the last 8 relatively recently in World Cup history, so it's not beyond the realms of doubt to say, given the fact that arguably they've had a reasonably favourable draw, having Iran and Wales in their group, who we'll go on to talk about in further reviews. Once you get beyond that group stage and it's a round of 16 straight knockout, anybody can beat anybody on their day, and who knows how far they could go. One other player that I wanted to highlight specifically, you talked about his dad, Claudio Reyna. I believe his mum was also a professional soccer player. Giovanni Reyna at Borussia Dortmund followed in the footsteps of Christian Pulisic by going there. Arguably had as good, if not greater, impact playing alongside Jude Bellingham in what has become a very talented young Dortmund side. Has been plagued with injury, unfortunately, but does look like he'll be fit for this World Cup. How much of an impact do you think Reyna can make on the World Cup? Is he, as I suspect he might be, perhaps one of the breakout stars of this tournament?
Yeah, I mean, for all he played for Rangers, his dad was one of the best American players in recent memory. But I think that this is not going to be like a Jordi Cruyff scenario. I think that Giovanni Reyna has the potential to surpass his father in terms of achievements. A very different type of player, but I think a much more exciting player than Claudio Reyna was. For all he was
and let's not be flippant about it, like you said. Regardless of the means by which they put that team together, that Rangers team at that time was a fantastic team. Claudio Reyna had to be a very good footballer to get into that team, and yet it does seem like you say that his son is going to go on and eclipse what he achieved.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. If you look at it from an American fan's point of view, Claudio Reyna is a legend to them, and you know the idea that his son could even become half the player he is would be an incredible thought. But I think we both agree he could end up becoming even better.
It's going to be interesting to see. I'm just, for the first time, I've managed to actually get the sequence of games, which is going to be interesting from the USA's point of view, at least. Opening against Wales, then their middle game is against England with a final game against Iran. Does that run of games inform how you think the group stage is going to go for the USA? Does it ever inform it for these situations, or is it just a case of taking each game one at a time?
I mean, the form guide would suggest that it's going to be a case of who comes second in the group behind England. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that is what the form guide says. So if you go with that, then that Wales-USA game, I think, essentially becomes a shootout for second place. Because I think they'll both beat Iran. But can either of them take something off of England? That's the key. The USA have done it, I think, was it 2010? They got a draw with England in the group stage?
Let me just see if I can find that. Yep, we got a draw with England and a draw with Slovenia and one against Algeria, who at the time were no pushovers either. So they ended up coming out of their group with 5 points back in 2010 and then went on to lose to Ghana in the round of 16.
Yeah, so the recent form is there. And to be honest, I think that the US are a better team now than they were then. And I think England are perhaps a slightly weaker team now than they were then. But England still have, England are still the heavy favourites for this group. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
If USA beat them, it would be a major shock. But I don't think it's completely beyond the realms of possibility.
I think it's going to make for an interesting group just in terms of the fact that, like you say, potentially both England and the USA could be going into that middle game with 3 points each. The other two teams fighting it out, Iran and Wales, to even get a point on the board. And then you being in a situation where it's actually probably better for the integrity of the group that the games have come this way, because I think if USA and England had been meeting each other in the last game of the group stages, they might have been happy to play out a draw of some description so that they both go through. So perhaps the run of games, the way that it's panned out, is actually going to make it a slightly more interesting group than we first thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and from USA and Iran's point of view, the fact they play each other last, if either of them can go against the form guide and take something off of England and something off of Wales, then they play each other. And it'd be nice if they went into that game and at least one of them still had a chance of going through,
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. Anyway, this is why I love doing this show with you, Liam, is because I've said it already, we've only covered 1.5 groups so far. But even when you think there's no storyline, even when you think it's a slightly less interesting group than some of the other ones that we've got to come, there's always a narrative there. There's always a story to look into. Even that, like you say, the history between England and USA at the World Cup before. I'm just looking back there. They even played each other in 1950 as well. So they've actually come across each other a few times at the World Cup, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes this time. We shall see. If you haven't seen the rest of our videos, this is part of a series that we're doing covering every team at the World Cup. So make sure and go back and watch those on Celtic Down Under's YouTube channel. You can comment below the videos. We aren't doing these live, thank goodness, after some of the stuff that we've had to cut out and redo, which we won't go into. But needless to say, there will be more of these in the run-up to the World Cup, and perhaps even spilling over slightly into the start of the World Cup so that we can cover every single team. It'll be Wales and Iran next, and we hope to see you at that point for coverage of those teams. Liam, thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you again very, very soon.
See you soon. Thank you.